Good morning. The hearing board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is Wednesday, October 25th, 2017. The time is approximately 9:10, and we have a pretty full agenda for today. We have two cases, which I'm going to call before any of the other matters that we are hearing today, and that includes SCAQMD versus, Avalos Lopez, case number 6090-1 for an order for abatement, and the Orange County Sheriff's Department, case number 6091-1. I'm going to start with the order for abatement, and I'm going to see if the parties are present on that case. And if not, who is representing the executive officer in that matter?
Senior Deputy District Counsel Brian Tomasovic for the executive officer.
Thank you so much. Can you spell your last name for us?
Spelling is Tomasovic.
Thank you, Mr. Tomasovic.
Correct.
Thank you, and welcome. Mr. Tomasovic, have you heard from the respondent in this matter? Do you know if he will be making an appearance?
I spoke to respondent's son, who assists in the business and is mentioned in some of the evidence that we have, and he indicated that neither he nor his father would be coming today.
Will not be appearing.
That's
okay.
correct.
And are you prepared today to present us with evidence of the respondent being properly served?
I can walk you through the documents that were filed to show proof of service and tie that up with the rule for service 2C under the board's rules and procedures.
If you could begin with that, please, so that we can then know that we can properly proceed to hear this matter in the absence of the respondent.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
I wonder if Mr. Tomasovic learned the reason why the respondent will not be here.
I can't speak to what his election may have been, the timing of, so service in this case was accomplished by substitute service of process. I can confirm just by discussions with his son, as I mentioned, that he at least has received actual notice and been able to look over the exhibits, but what counts for service of process here falls under Rule 2C2, substituted service followed by mailing, deemed complete on the 10th day of the mailing. So,
But he didn't tell you why he would not be here. For example, he's in hospital or?
well, in candor, I know from his son that he's presently in Mexico. At some of the times when we attempted to make service, I don't know that that was the case.
Thank you.
And may I, if I could, I want to just refer to the board's Rule 7B2 with regard to attendance at a hearing, and I'll just read it. If the responding party fails to attend the hearing and the petitioning party has provided the hearing board with proof of service on the respondent of the petition, the hearing board may rule on the petition in the respondent's absence, and it is on that basis which, once we have proof of service, we will proceed.
The proof of service filing was made yesterday, and I don't know that copies were.
I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas.
Your rules say we may rule,
Sovic.
not absolutely required to rule. May is not required.
Is there a reason why you would, if the respondent was, I'm going to ask everybody at this moment to please make sure your phones are turned off, at least your ringer. Thank you.
Including me. Sorry about that.
Senator, is there a reason why you would not wish to hear the case today or rule in the absence of respondent, if respondent was properly served with notice of the order for abatement today?
There may be extenuating circumstances which we may not be aware of. And this is a small operator, clear from the evidence that I've read, very small, not aware of what was going on legally that would affect his livelihood or operation. Not really understood it, how well this was communicated to him. The guy just didn't understand. I would say that we should give a continuance.
Senator, first I would like to hear from the district as to their attempts to serve the respondent and any other evidence with regard to service of the petition in this matter, and then we can make a decision. I don't think we should make a decision before we hear all the evidence,
I
please.
understand what you're trying to obtain here, but even if you do, you're not going to put the guy in jail because he's not going to respond anyway. He just doesn't know.
I don't think we're asking to put the man in jail.
He's going to keep operating when he's not in Mexico.
Mr. Tomasovic, could you present the board with proof of service of the petition?
Yes, walking through the filing of the proofs of service, the first page is an indication that a copy was served at a household that we identify as the home, residence, and the place.
May I interrupt you? Do we have copies of what you are presently going through?
We have everything.
Yesterday, I received a notice of intent to introduce documents as exhibits. I also received proposed findings and decision for an order for abatement, and I have the original petition. Sorry, we're going to go off the record.
Oh, boy.
We're back on the record. The board has now received a document entitled Proofs of Service by Substituted Service, et cetera, in this case, and it was filed yesterday afternoon. So, Mr. Tomasovic, if you could walk us through this, that would be appreciated.
Turning from the caption page, page 1, there's a document entitled Proof of Service, signed by a man named Norman Vilches. He's who we hired as an outside process server. Part of the thinking in this case is that there may be some difficulty in serving process on the individual, and so we did hire an outside service to do this. As explained in the notes there for manner of service, the manner of service is substituted service, which is accomplished consistent with Rule 2C2 by leaving copies with adult at the household over the age of 18, and following that up with dropping a copy of the same document served in the mail. Turning to the next page, there's a document called the Affidavit of Due Diligence, which shows that prior to this day of substituted service, on Thursday, October 12th, there were 3 prior attempts at personal service at the household at various times in the preceding days. You have an attempt at 9 in the morning approximately, and further attempts later in the week in the evening hours, approximately 6:30 p.m., 7 p.m. And then finally, as indicated there, on the 12th, the subject on whom service was attempted wasn't there. An individual that didn't want to give his name but was over the age of 18 was served as a substitute. Turning to the document after the next divider, there's a document called Proof of Service by Mail, indicating that the process servers we hired ultimately dropped the item in the mail on October 6th, 2017. In fact, distrusting that they would be timely in dropping this in the mail, we did our own mail, which is the last document in there. That mailing happened on October 13th, the Friday. And by the terms of Rule 2C2, substituted service is deemed complete on the 10th day after such mailing, and therefore service was complete 2 days ago.
Thank you, Mr. Tomasovic. Do you have anything else to present? That seems to be sufficient, but do you have anything else to present on proof of service?
I could proffer that we do have a witness that could explain, in conjunction with issuance of the NOVs, there was difficulties in speaking to this individual. The witness would testify that attempts to call the individual led to the phone being hung up, and that's part of why we hired outside process servers, just to ensure that we were by the book on this.
Thank you, Mr. Tomasovic. Board members, I think at this point, as the senator pointed out, we have the option of hearing this case in the absence of the respondent. I believe that I am satisfied that there was sufficient service and that it was proper service, and that respondent has failed to show up, and that we may hear this case. But if any board member would like to hear from the witness, as Mr. Tomasovic just stated, who could give some background on the difficulty of reaching this respondent, we could do that as well. Mr. Camarena, you wanted to?
Yes, I'm satisfied with the service. However, I do not know why the respondent is not present, and that gives me some reason to wonder what at least how my vote should be here.
I'm sorry, how? I didn't hear the last part.
Let me say it another way. I would like to know if it is possible why the respondent is not here. He's out of the country apparently. For what reason?
I don't know that that's necessary to know precisely why a respondent does not show. However, it might then be helpful. It seems the senator had questions. Mr. Camarena, you have questions. it may help to shed light if we could hear from the witness, Mr. Tomasovic, that you just mentioned, who might be able to explain the difficulties that have been encountered in the past in trying to speak with the respondent on NOVs. Would that be helpful? No. Why not, Senator?
Because the respondent may not speak English that well. He may be concerned this is not printed in Spanish, even if I don't know how literate he is, but we have an obligation to ensure that the respondent clearly understand what the complaint is all about in a language that he can read and understand, if that is all possible. We've been over backwards to have the rich and famous and fat cats. In fact, we talked for hours and hours on some of those situations, as we did yesterday. And the little guy who's just trying to survive, who may not be able to communicate with us, or may not be here, on legal terms. I don't know. You said he was in Mexico, is that correct?
That's what I understand from a conversation with his son.
Well, there are extenuating circumstances, in my view, given that be the case. You vote your conscience. I can tell you that I would want to hold off until I can know for sure that we talk directly to the person who's the respondent, and that he understands what this action that we're taking is all about. If he failed to appear, that's okay. We can take that action. But it seemed to me, even after reading the report, he can't go to a tier 4, doesn't have the money anyway. Okay, but that's up to him if you want to enforce this. But it just caused me some concern that with the rich and famous with powerful attorneys can come in and get a hearing. Before a little guy can't. I know he's going to say that.
What I would have to say to that is when you show up, you get a fair hearing.
Yeah,
Ms.
okay,
Byrd,
yeah,
did you?
I just wanted to say that we were asking for information from from witnesses to testify so we can understand better why or how we arrived at this, the proof of service and who talked to who, and you can confirm for us through your witnesses whether or not he understood and whether or not they spoke Spanish or any other language. And so let's just hear from them to see exactly what happened.
Thank you. I think we're at that point where we need to do that. If you can introduce that witness, Mr. Tomasovic, we would appreciate it.
Is this witness to testify on the difficulties of contacting him to resolve the NOV?
Yes, because obviously I understand this witness is not the witness who served or attempted to serve the respondent. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so really, this witness can only explain evasiveness in the past.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That will be helpful.
We call District Inspector Mauricio Enriquez.
At this point, I don't know if we're going to hear the case, but any other witnesses who may be testifying today in this matter, please rise to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes. Thank you.
Inspector Enriquez, could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Yes, Mauricio Enriquez, Mauricio, Enriquez, Enriquez.
And you have just taken the oath, correct?
I have.
I'll,
Air Quality Inspector 2.
I am showing you now what was filed with the board as Exhibit 1 to the petition for the order for abatement. Do you recognize this document?
I do.
And what is it?
It's the NOV that I served Mr. Everardo.
And what was the violation that was cited?
It was for Rule 203, A, for operating an engine that was rated over 50 horsepower without a valid SCAQMD permit or a CARB perp registration.
On the day after you issued this NOV, did you do any follow-up inspection?
Yes, when I attempted to track him down and talk to him about what he had done.
Did you attempt to, did you look to see whether the equipment was in the same location in the days that followed?
I did.
In attempting to speak with the respondent in the days that followed, what difficulties did you have in trying to speak with him or resolve the NOV?
The first time I attempted to talk to him over the phone, he did respond. I explained to him that I was calling in follow-up of the issuance of the NOV, asking him what steps he had taken towards getting the engine permitted or registered with PERP. And at the time, he told me he was a little bit busy at the moment. He kind of was hesitant to talk to me at that moment. And then briefly after that, he just hung up the phone on me. I tried calling him back, which he answered. And when I explained that it was me again, he hung up and then proceeded to not answer my calls anytime after that.
Pass the witness.
Did you have any reason to believe that the respondent, when you spoke with him, did not understand English?
I spoke with him in Spanish.
You spoke with him in Spanish. And the NOV and other documents that are served on respondent, are they available in Spanish as well?
That I'm aware of, no. But I did explain what the NOV was for, the ways in which he could gain access to applications or filing the permit with, or the registration with CARB, and how he could come into compliance. All of that was done verbally and in Spanish.
Thank you. Mr. Camarena.
One of the declarations indicates that at this point in time, that equipment cannot be permitted by the district, nor can it receive a PERP registration. What about in 2015 when you served the notice of violation? Was it permittable or was it eligible for registration?
I honestly don't remember.
You don't remember or don't know?
No, I don't remember. I remember that we went through the process of explaining to him that he needed to get it registered or permitted, provided him with the information in order to be told whether or not it was going to be permittable or not.
I see. Do you know if he at any point in time had a PERP registration or a district permit for that equipment?
I believe he did not. I researched both our database and the CARB PERP registration database, and at that time it showed that he had not, in any other form, had it registered or permitted.
Thank you.
Ms. Byrd.
I'm sorry, you said you followed up for many, did you say many days, or did you say many days later?
When I'm not exactly sure the dates exactly when I followed up in person to see if the equipment was still there, but I know shortly after issuing the NOV, I believe I contacted him via the phone.
Okay, so within a week after you issued the NOV, you're saying you contacted him by phone approximately, or?
Let's see, the follow-up was done a little over a month, and then I believe I called him about a couple of months afterwards.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying with the follow-up, what that means.
Oh, sorry. So the follow-up means that we go to the site where we observe the equipment and try to see if we can
Okay.
and see them operating again or see them so we can talk to them.
And you did that within how many days of the initial NOV?
It's about a little over a month.
A month later. And did you find him at that site?
Did not.
Okay. Then there was some mention of this address and the service, and I think I saw it in one of these documents, but I can't remember where. How was the address obtained?
He provided me his driver's license,
Okay.
as well as when he was trying to show proof that it had been registered, he provided me with a DMV slip, which was consistent with the address that was on the license.
Okay. And I don't know if you have looked at the order for abatement, but Exhibit 4, and maybe this can refresh your memory based on the question that Mr. Camarino was asking. based on this exhibit, he would not have been able to register that equipment after 2007, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so since 2007, he would not be able to register this equipment, so he's been, and we know that he's been out of compliance at least 2 years. Okay. Do you have any idea in your discussions with them approximately when he may have begun using the equipment?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you.
You testified that you provided him with information with regard to permitting and perp registration. Was that in writing?
No, it was all verbal.
All verbal?
We showed him, on my district phone, I showed him the websites and provided him that information. I believe he did write it down. But as far as I remember, it was mostly verbal.
And it was verbal in Spanish, is that
Yes.
correct? But on the website, it is not Spanish, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Believe it is or is not?
It's not.
It's not. Do you know whether he understood when you showed him the website?
He said that he had someone that would be able to help him with it. I believe it was his son.
Okay, so to your mind, in speaking with him, he understood the issue
Yes,
and how to correct it?
I believe so.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator?
On your cell phone, showing him what the situation was all about. It was not in Spanish, in English. He doesn't read English, obviously. Do you believe he does?
Well, he mentioned that he had a form of having somebody help him with it.
Which means having a form and reading and understanding are two different things. Is that correct?
Yes?
Yes, you held at a higher standard. You're bilingual, you're the inspector. Okay? So you should make sure all the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted. To your knowledge, is there a different dialect spoken in Mexico from one area to another?
Not necessarily. I mean, there's different types of Spanish. There are different slangs and that kind of
Oh,
thing.
different types and different slangs.
But for the most part, the meaning is understood.
To you,
I would imagine to most people that speak Spanish.
maybe somebody who's terrified and might not understand it right away. They're frightened based on the circumstance. You don't know that to be a fact.
I don't.
You've not been put in that position.
I have not.
You're the policia. In this case, did you see that equipment in operation at any time?
Yes.
When?
We were actually parking, getting ready to go to lunch, and we saw the equipment in operation. I was with Inspector Sanders at the time, and she said, hey, this would be a good learning opportunity. It was in operation, so we walked over to this equipment and we verified to see if it had a registration or a permit. And at the time when we approached it, there was workers loading pieces of branches and tree cuttings into the back of the chipper that was going inside of a truck.
How many times, if any, did you see the equipment was not being operated?
Only when they moved it and parked so that we could discuss the whole permitting
Was that the
situation.
same day or
It was
some
the
other?
same day.
So it was not in operation. When was the next time you saw it, if at all?
It was just that one day.
One day.
Yeah.
No follow-up.
Well, when I followed up for it, they weren't operating at that site. At a later date, Inspector Sanders encountered the same equipment in operation as well. Same people operating it.
Did you explain to him that you knew, but did you share the information that he could not operate that equipment ever because of the rules and regulations?
Yes, I explained to him that he would need to get a permit or register it in order to operate it within the rules and regulations.
But that equipment is not permittable. You know that, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Why tell me you should get a permit if you knew that you couldn't get a permit on that equipment?
Well, they're supposed to submit that information, and then they were told what they can do as far as getting it registered.
If you told me that I told him that equipment is not permittable, you got to get new equipment, here's what you have to buy. You didn't tell him that, did you?
I did not. But I did tell him that he was unable to operate it currently the way
Well,
it was.
I'm doing my thing, you do yours. Thank you. Wait a minute. You know, when I compare how we approach one case to another, it's upsetting to me. When we do the things we do sometime, and I don't want to go at them.
I have to stop that
Stop
there.
it. You're like, no, I'm gonna overrule the chair and keep talking.
Well, Senator, we treat every
No, you do
single.
not.
Yes, we do.
Well, I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way.
Senator
I see
Holding,
it the way I see it.
may I make a proffer as to what we could offer as additional witness testimony? So if district, and this is again on the issue of sufficiency of process, which I understand ties in with Spanish-speaking abilities, or your concern about that. District Inspector Sanders, if she were called to testify, would speak
No,
to
I'm not ready to listen to him yet. I want to finish with this guy.
Well, she would speak to the
Please,
occasion.
sir, I want to exhaust my questioning with this gentleman here, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. On his license, driver's license you saw, do you have a recollection of when the license was issued?
If I have the information in front of me. Okay. No, I did not, at least not what I have in front of me when it was issued, no.
It's important. You know why, don't you? The law changed to permit certain people to get a driver's license, even though don't have a legal standing. Is that correct?
I think so.
You think so? Don't you know that to be the case? The question is, do you know that to be the case?
I'm not sure.
Well, the reason why you should know is from the community. And the reason why I asked that question is because there may be other reasons why this individual's in Mexico today, or maybe if you think he's assuming that somebody's going to try and apprehend them to be deported. You don't know that, do you?
I don't know that, no.
Well, that could be a reason. All right, thank you.
Mr. Tomasovic, you mentioned Ms. Sanders might be able to also
She
shed some
showed,
light.
I have a question for the.
Sorry, Mr. Camarena has a question for Mr. Enriquez.
Actually, two questions. Did Mr. Avalos indicate a willingness to seek a permit or registration?
Yeah, he explained that he didn't know that he required one. That's why when we were going over the matters, he provided me with a DMV slip for the trailer. He thought that was the registration. He was unaware. So when I explained to him what was required, he said that he would work on getting it submitted.
The senator asked you a question regarding whether or not you advised the respondent as to whether or not the equipment was permittable. Isn't that the job of the engineer that reviews the application?
For the most part, yes. We would know, but when the application is submitted, an engineer or someone at CARB would look at the registrations or those applications.
And not your responsibility?
No.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Dr. Lerner?
Apparently he's in Mexico now, is that correct?
As far as what Mr. Tovasovic told me, yes.
Okay. We don't know if he is Mexican. We do not know his country of origin. What I just want to get at is the clarity of your conversation with him. Was it clear to you, in your own opinion, that when you were speaking to him in Spanish, he understood you? I mean, he wasn't from El Salvador or someplace where the language and the dialect might be different, and he's just nodding his head and, agreeing with you for this because you're a person in authority, he's being threatened, etc. I can understand that emotional thing. I just want to be sure that at least in your opinion, because you're the only one who saw him, and I suppose we could ask the other witness the same question, whether you felt comfortable that you were communicating with him and that he understood what you were saying, and this was not merely, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, I'll do it, I'll do it, I'll do it, because he didn't know what else to do and he didn't understand you. I just want to be sure that what your opinion was, because there's no way of us knowing. Okay, is it your testimony that you felt that he understood what was going on?
Yeah.
That this was a separate issue other than the trailer, other than his driver's license, et cetera?
I would say that he
Yeah,
understood
and he did
clearly.
respond to you in sentences, not just simply nod his head or say yes?
Yes, no,
or
we
whatever.
had a conversation. It was more than just yes or no's.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Senator.
Substitute service. You don't have any assurance that he received this?
He's not the process server.
I understand.
So you cannot ask this witness questions about service, a process that he did not serve.
Well, were you aware that that's what's before us?
No, this witness was brought on by Mr. Tomasovic merely to give the board some background as to the fact that this respondent has been evasive in the past when NOVs have been served. The process server is not present.
All right. For now.
Any other questions for Mr. Enriquez? Ms. Byrd?
Please excuse me if I can't remember where in the documents things are that I read, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I saw something in one of the documents that alluded to there was a business license for this in 2006 in the city of Temecula or Murrieta?
Murrieta, yeah.
Murrieta? Okay, so that's correct.
Yeah, it
So there
was-
was a business license that you know of in 2006.
I don't remember the 2006 part, but I do remember on the housing of the engine, it had a business license number.
Okay. And
the
that that business license had expired and not been renewed.
That I can attest to.
Okay. I'll have to find it in the documents. Okay, thank you.
Any others? Senator?
Since you raised the business license was issued to whom?
It didn't say on the
Right,
housing.
then it's not.
Mr. Tomasovic, would you like to produce Ms. Sanders?
Yes. Petitioner calls District Inspector Amanda Sanders. Good morning, Inspector Sanders. Could you state and spell your name for the record?
Yes, Amanda Sanders, Amanda, Sanders, Sanders.
And did you take the oath today?
Yes, I did.
What is your position with the AQMD?
I'm a supervising air quality inspector.
I'm showing the witness what is marked as Exhibit 2 to the petition for order for abatement. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
It's the violation notice that I issued and served to Everardo Lopez for operating an engine without an AQMD permit or California Air Resources Board registration.
And can you identify the date of on which you initially issued this?
Yes, it was the same day that I observed the equipment in operation without a permit or registration, and that was January 1st, 2017.
I'm going to flip now.
January 10th, I'm sorry.
I'm going to flip now to what the previous witness already spoke to, which is Exhibit 1 to the petition for order for abatement. Are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I am.
And how are you familiar with it?
I was with Inspector Enriquez at the time that he served the notice to Mr. Alvarado Lopez.
Okay. At the time of that you issued the NOV in 2017, did you speak Spanish with Mr. Avalos Lopez?
Yes, our conversation was mostly in Spanish, but it was in English and in Spanish.
And was Mr. Avalos Lopez accompanied by an individual that identified himself as the son of the business owner?
Yes.
And do you recall his name?
I can look at it briefly in my report. I believe it was Romaldo Avalos Lopez.
And how would you describe his capabilities in speaking English?
He clearly spoke English. He stated that he would interpret any information that I provided him that his father may not have understood.
Would you describe this as native fluency?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Would you say that the son spoke English with native fluency?
Yes.
During the time you began your inspection of the engine, was Mr. Avalos Lopez at all evasive in your interactions?
When I first walked up, he saw me and we began having a conversation. It was a normal conversation. But however, once I started speaking with him, asking him if I could inspect his equipment, he started to become agitated. And then I realized that I recognized him. He was the same person that I met with when Inspector Enriquez served the first notice of violation. And he shared with me that he did recall that I was there during the issuance of the first notice. And he did become upset during our conversation when I continued to ask him to not only let me inspect the equipment, but to provide me the paperwork to demonstrate he had a permit or a registration.
Based on these interactions, were you surprised at all to hear Inspector Enriquez's testimony that this individual had hung up the phone in trying to resolve the NOV in the past?
I was not surprised.
One question I didn't ask of the prior witness, when folks want to apply for a permit or see if they can apply for a permit, what office at AQMD handles those inquiries?
We have staff that issues permits, so they can contact our permit engineering office.
And do we have resources on staff that are able to speak English or speak Spanish to individuals that may need assistance?
Yes.
Ask the witness.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Sanders? Ms. Byrd?
When you saw the equipment, and once again, I apologize, I read all these papers and I can't remember who exactly said what. Did you see the name of the business on the side of the truck? Someone in their declaration indicated that.
Yes, I did actually took a photo as well, and it's provided as an attachment.
Okay. And the name on this, is the attachment
It's
with
part
the
of
photo?
the notice of violation that I issued, P65509.
I don't believe that has been provided to the board.
Oh, okay. I
Although
didn't think
one
I
can
saw
be
one, but I
obtained.
thought maybe I missed it. Okay, so the sign on the side of the trucks, do you remember what it said?
Yes, if you give me just one moment, I'll actually
Sure.
read it to
Okay.
you from the photograph. It was a sticker placed on the passenger door of the vehicle, and it said Everardo's Tree Service, pruning, shaping, trimming, thinning, tree removal, stump grinding, crown reduction, brush cleaning, fire requirements, lots and hillside cleanup, license number 14757, and then a phone number 951-760-5193, and all of it was in English.
Okay. And that was that, I think it was the investigator, so maybe, I don't know if you could answer this, but that would be the source of the search for a business license for this facility based on the information that you provided to the investigator.
Yeah, this was the only information that I came across of any business license number.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Sanders? Thank you very much. Oh, Senator.
He said he did not permit you to inspect the equipment, is that correct?
Oh, no, he did.
And you-
He allowed me to, I asked him for permission, and he said, that is fine, go ahead. But then he continued to walk away because he was very agitated at that point. So at that point in time, I asked one of the 3 other workers that were there to accompany me to inspect the equipment, and actually asked them to handle the equipment to show me the data tag on the engine.
So that's what you were looking for by inspecting the equipment?
Yes.
The data tag, what's that?
It's a tag that's on the engine itself to identify the unit.
Okay, thank you.
Is that data tag, what we see reproduced, I don't know if this is your declaration? No, it's a different declaration, but there are two declarations that have engine family, arrangement number, engine type, displacement, and rating. Is that what's on the
Yes.
data tag?
Yes.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Board members, well, let me just ask Mr., okay, wait, one other question.
They had a lot of tree trimmers in operation out there. I drive down one street, and there's one sign, got trimming trees and stuff. Did you stop and check all of them out?
Typically, when I was in the field, if I found a piece of portable equipment out in the field, and if I wasn't, I didn't have an appointment to be somewhere, I would stop on my way there, especially if I saw them operating, because oftentimes you wouldn't find them at that same location, or you may never find them again in the field.
Would you say if you didn't have another,
Like, say I had, I had made an appointment to be somewhere,
Be
I wouldn't
some-
want to be late, so I wouldn't stop. But if I saw them on my way, maybe just to some unannounced stop, and I know I could be there at any time, of course I would stop and inspect the unit.
but there are times you didn't stop?
No, I wouldn't, I would stop.
There are
to-
times you didn't stop because you had something else to do.
Only if I had an appointment to be somewhere.
Did you ever have that situation develop where you had an appointment to be somewhere and you saw the equipment being operated?
I mean, only if I saw maybe an egregious violation, maybe of like a dust rule or something like that, would I maybe call my contact and say, I'm going to be late. But typically, if I was just driving around and I was just on my way somewhere to an unannounced inspection, that was part of our assignment, was to stop and inspect these portable sources.
What's a dust blower?
I'm sorry, what
You
are
said
you
if
asking?
you saw a dust blower, then you would stop.
We don't inspect dust blowers.
That's not
I
what you
said,
said.
I said, like an egregious violation of a dust rule. So like, say there's a
dust
construction
rule.
site and there's dust blowing off the site.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Sanders, you just indicated, if you can just expand on this a little bit, but you indicated that that is what you are to do. Is that part of your duties, is to stop if you see portable equipment? Is that what other inspectors that are similarly assigned as you are, is that generally the procedure?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Senator?
How many times have you stopped and observed this happening? That's your assignment. How many times have you written a complaint like the ones before us today?
I've written several notices of violation. I can't give you an exact number because I don't have that source in front of me to refer to.
Well, did you ever bring a case like that before the hearing board?
I've brought other cases, but I don't know if I've had one exactly like this.
Have you brought a case before us or to the district where there's been a violator using equipment that was not permitted?
Ms. Sanders does not bring cases before this hearing board.
Well, she said I want to know what a pattern and practices happen to be.
That would not tell us what the pattern and practices of the district. The district has brought cases against small operators in the past, and respondents have not shown up in the past.
What do we do about it?
We have this type of discussion, and we receive evidence on proof of service.
First one before me in a year and a half.
It happens, that's why there's a rule for it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Sanders? Okay. Mr. Tomasovic, any other proof on this particular point before we have a discussion?
No.
Thank you. Board members, let's discuss whether we are desiring under Rule 7B2 of our hearing board rules to hear this case, this matter today in the absence of the respondent. I believe that we have had ample evidence that, first, this respondent was properly served under the rules that regulate service of process. We also heard even further information from both Mr. Enriquez and Ms. Sanders that this respondent clearly understood the situations as early as 2015. There were multiple conversations with the respondent, both in Spanish and partially in English. We understand from the inspectors that it was their opinion that the respondent understood. We also heard from Ms. Sanders that the respondent's son, who spoke English with native fluency, also had a conversation about what needed to be done and did state that he would interpret all information for his father. We also heard testimony and evidence regarding evasiveness of the respondent in wishing to either hang up the phone, leave a situation, not want to confront the situation. So with all of that, regardless of whether this person speaks Spanish, regardless of whether this person is a small operator, I believe that the evidence is overwhelming that this respondent was properly served and understands that he should be here today. Mr. Camarena,
I agree.
anyone else? Ms. Byrd?
I would say I agree that I believe that we could have this hearing, but I also understand the need to try to adjust for pro se litigants, and because of that, I would be willing, but I don't know that it would matter, but I would be willing to have this hearing another day.
Senator?
I'm a victim of substitute service. I know what it's like to be in a legal situation where you did not receive the document in your own hand. Somebody dropped it off someplace and gave it to another individual. I don't have an assurance. I've not been convinced that this defendant received and understood those documents and he had them in his hand. You gave it to someone else you believed to be over 21 years of age. Well, you know, we are, in my view, required to have absolute assurance that the individual has been properly served. Substitute service is not that at all. You can believe and hope that the person gave it to the defendant, and the defendant understood what was being presented to him, and therefore was he notified that he should be here today? What notice did you provide that that defendant should be here today? If anything, any notice at all?
Are you asking whether I should present an argument on
I'm just saying.
the issue?
We're done with
I'm
this
just
part of
saying,
the hearing. This is discussion,
there's no evidence
deliberation.
that the defendant who's supposed to be in Mexico was aware he was supposed to appear today. Nobody told me that. In any case, a substitute service, in my view, is secondary. Not sure that the person received and understood what this problem is all about. And I just not going to support that concept at all, period.
Senator, I don't know the situation in which you speak, and I do believe that there are situations where substitute service may lead to confusion. In this case, however, I understand that the substitute service was given to the son, who was part and parcel of the discussion since 2015. The evidence that we received is that both the respondent and his son had had conversations with inspectors since 2015. Then again in 2017, 2 NOVs were received, and that the respondent is well aware of the situation. And having had the substitute service be of the son gives me more comfort of the substitute service. But I understand the position of both Ms. Byrd and Senator. So the question is, will it make a difference if we continued this hearing for a week? I doubt it. However, I'm willing to chance it. Mr. Camarena.
I would like to continue the matter, and the reason is this, that we don't know, first of all, we don't know if Mr. Avalos is out of the country. But if he is, we don't know why he is out of the country. Is he visiting a relative that is gravely ill? Is he out of the country for legal reasons? We don't know. I am troubled that the son did not elect to appear in his behalf. The evidence at this point is overwhelming, in my view, in favor of requiring that the equipment no longer be operated until such time it has a permit or registration or, well, period. So just to tie up those loose ends, I'd like to continue the matter.
I would have to say, I agree. First of all, there's a lot of questions in at least two board members' minds with regard to where is the respondent, will the respondent show? The other part, Senator, as you have pointed out, this is a very small operator. And generally, when we deal with small operators and small businesses, whereas financial issues or financial ability is not at all a factor with larger respondents, with small businesses, we can consider that. And if we were to, which the evidence seems to be overwhelming in the favor of an order for abatement eventually when we hear the case, but perhaps we would want to hear from the respondent with regard to a schedule that makes sense for the respondent. So given that, I'm willing to entertain any kind of request for continuance. However, Senator, I just wanted to respond really briefly to the idea that this board gives unfair treatment to small operators. As the legal member and chair of this board, I can assure the public we follow every single rule of procedure to the T consistently in every single case. We follow and hear the evidence in every single case. However, those who choose to do business also need to choose to follow the rules. And so I don't choose to set a precedent that says just because you do not speak English fluently, just because you're a small operator means you never have to follow the rules because there are bigger fish out there. Everyone needs to follow the rules. With that said, how long of a continuance would we like to?
Just because you don't speak English, the ballots that we vote on, different languages. And we're going to give the absolute assurance that people, then before they make a decision, they understand what they're doing. I mean, come on, my friends. Okay? Just because they don't speak English should be no excuse. They're not making excuses. The person who was served just took the paper. What I read initially, they didn't give a name, who they served. It was not the son. It could have been anyone. They assumed the person was over 21 years of age. They don't know. They can look at a Hispanic guy and say, I can guess your age. They don't know. Say they're 40, but they still don't know. There are a lot of things that are unknown as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, but the evidence in this case from the two inspectors was that this particular respondent understood perfectly what was going on.
Not served.
Okay, well, regardless, that's why we're going to continue the case, so that there is a further opportunity for this respondent to be heard, and at that point, I think we need to hear the case. Ms. Byrd.
I would like to ask the senator, because I think he's going to question no matter what date we pick, how long he thinks it would be appropriate to continue this case.
Oh, you're asking me that, huh?
Yeah, because I think you're going to disagree with whatever date we choose, so I may as well ask you to begin with. So we'll start there.
Well, you should have that answer unless and until the person is back in this, wherever he is served and understand what the consequences are.
So we can go for years until we track him down?
No.
We're following protocol. The legal protocol. What is it that you would like to see happen?
Well, if I were going to give the assurance to the individual that at the timeline, if you ask me for a timeline.
We have to set a date. And like I said, I have a
would be
feeling
that-
whatever date we choose that you might not agree, so I'm just starting with you.
I think it's reasonable. Reasonable is a term they use in law very often.
Yes, we know.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Well, then we should do what's reasonable here today,
So
and
what are you saying
I'm
is
glad you
reasonable?
are. That you go and talk to the son again. Tell him what action that we were about to take. And
Okay,
we'll-
we do not have the ability to order the district to do
Not
anything.
ordering, you're not ordering. She asked me, I'm suggesting.
No, I ask you for a date.
All
That's
we need
I
right
ask
now is
for.
a date. We're agreeing, it seems that the majority of the board is agreeing to continue this matter. I'm suggesting 2 weeks. How long would the rest of the board members like to see? And in the meantime, obviously, there will be further attempts to get in touch with this respondent, and we will hear what those attempts are when we reconvene in 2 or other weeks. 2 weeks is reasonable? Okay.
Yes, sir.
And I'm,
I would,
Dr.
I
Lerner?
would push it for a little bit more because in 2 weeks, if he knows this is being continued for 2 weeks, he may be able to stay out of town for 2 weeks. But if you wait a little bit longer, he's going to have to come back because he has to earn a living.
Okay, if he actually is in fact out, we have no idea
Yeah,
where he is.
we have no idea about anything.
So I'm going to ask Mr. Tomasovic, are you available on November 14th, which is a Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay. Then I'm going to ask the rest of my fellow board members, it's November 14th, Tuesday, which is a little over 2 weeks, acceptable?
Yes.
Senator?
Yeah, I would say yes, and I want to thank the board for its consideration.
Of course. Dr.
this
Lerner?
issue.
I would go along with the board, but I would prefer a month.
Okay. We're going to continue this hearing to November 14th, Tuesday, November 14th.
Madam Chair, when we come back, I would like to hear from someone as to whether or not the records were checked that day or the day before to determine if some effort had been made. But I guess that's not, I'll take that back. Since we have a declaration that equipment is not permittable or eligible for PERP registration, that's not relevant.
I think what we'll likely be looking for, obviously, we can't require the district to do anything, but we'll be looking for what further attempts, if any, were made to contact the respondent. Thank you very much. With that, we are continued in that case to November 14th, 2017, on Tuesday. Thank you. Let's take a 15-minute break, and at 10:30, we're going to reconvene and call the second case, which is Orange County Sheriff's Department, case number 6091-1. We're off the record till 10:30. We are back on the record. I'm going to call the second case of our day, second matter of the day, Orange County Sheriff's Department, case number 6091-1 for a short variance. Who is representing the Orange County Sheriff's Department today? And who are you? Can you spell your last name?
SCHADE.
And you said Gary Shade?
Gary, Gary.
And what is your position, Mr. Shade?
Administrative Manager 1.
Thank you. And who is representing the executive officer?
Brian Tomasovic, Senior Deputy District Defense Counsel, Senior Deputy District Counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Tomasovic. Mr. Shade, have you been before the board before?
This is my first time.
Okay, and I understand you did not have an opportunity to watch the video on.
That's correct.
Okay, so then let me just briefly explain to you how the process will work today. And if you have any questions throughout, that's fine to ask. So since you are the petitioning party for the short variance, you will begin. I'm going to ask you to please present just an opening statement. That's just a brief summary of your position of why you're asking for a variance and what you're asking for today. I'm going to go to Mr. Tomasovic, who's going to give the district's short opening as well. After that, you'll have an opportunity to introduce any witnesses. Mr. Shade, will you be testifying today as a witness?
I have a partner with me here who will be testifying as a witness.
Okay, but not yourself.
I will be helping him, yes.
Okay.
We'll be doing it together.
We'll try to do it one witness at a time. If you could
Okay.
try and, are you familiar with maybe we can put it up, with the findings that this board needs to make in order to grant a variance?
I am not.
Okay, so we're going to put those up for you, and what will happen is we'll come to you for a more detailed version of why you're here, what the basis is, and what you're asking for. Then I'm going to ask Mr. Tomasovic if he has any questions for you, so he can question you as well. And we'll go one witness at a time so that it's good for the record, helps the record, since we make an audio recording of the record. And then board members will also have an opportunity to ask you and your other witness questions as well. Once you're done and you feel you've presented your entire case, we'll move to the district for any witnesses that they may have to present. And the same thing, you have an opportunity to ask questions, so does the board. After that, I'll ask if any member of the public wishes to be heard today, and then the board will deliberate and make a decision today. Do you have any questions at this time?
I do not, thank you.
Okay. Do you have a short opening statement as to why you're here today and what you're looking for?
Sure. We're here today to petition for a variance due to a recent large wildfire, the Canyon Fire, the first one that we just had. A few power lines burned down, Southern California Edison power lines burned down that typically provide power to one of our communications sites. These communications sites allow for police, fire, any of the helicopters that are involved, any of the airplanes that are involved in fighting fires, all the personnel that are there, this allows them to communicate with each other and to communicate with dispatch. Without the generator having to come on, if it did not come on, these firefighters would not be able to communicate. So they're essential for what we do in law enforcement and in the fire authority. So what had happened was we went over our 200 hours and we actually went to 240 hours with this generator. It is a propane generator. It's a clean generator. And that's why we're here today, is just a petition for the variance. We need to continue to maintain this generator. We've had some other fires, obviously recently, even this week, and this generator specifically is essential to, in my opinion, to saving lives and saving homes in Orange County and Riverside County.
Thank you, Mr. Shade. Mr. Tomasovic, your opening.
Assuming the board receives reliable evidence consistent with that opening argument and consistent with the written petition that came in, the district anticipates it will support the hearing board granting a short variance in this case.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Shade and your other witness to please stand to be sworn in, and if I can ask any district witnesses to also stand to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay, Mr. Shade, if it makes sense, it would be helpful to go down each of the findings. But if you're not prepared to do that, then if you can just present how you are prepared, but one witness at a time. Mr.
Might it
Cameron?
be helpful if you were given a few minutes to review that so he can organize his thoughts?
Would you like to do that, Mr. Shade?
Are you referring to, is this what they're referring to? Or is this what you're referring to?
What's on the screen?
Okay.
So what has been presented, oh, let me mark that, thank you. We received a document from the district, which is proposed conditions, and we're going to mark that as Exhibit A. And Mr. Shade, have you have an opportunity to review that?
I have,
Okay, and you are in agreement with those proposed conditions?
yes.
Okay. Would you like to take a moment to read the findings that this board needs to make, and then perhaps match your testimony to what we need to find?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's go off the record, and would 10 minutes be, or 5
Fine.
minutes?
5 is fine.
5 is sufficient? Okay, we'll go off the record for 5 minutes. We're back on the record. Mr. Shade, are you ready to begin?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If you can, I think you already stated and spelled your name and stated your title for the record. I believe that's sufficient for the clerk, is that correct? And can you just state that you took the oath and then proceed?
Sure. I took the oath. So currently we are in violation of going over our 200 hours. And that is due to conditions that are beyond our reasonable control. Looking at the health and safety code, we are conducting as a public agency and offering services to the public. And therefore, that if this generator did not run or exceed its 200 hours, again, in my opinion, possible lives are at risk due to that. Due to the lack of emergency communications and things that have happened in the past when communications did go down, while fighting firefighters, we have lost lives. And then as far as monitoring this, the gentleman that I brought with me today is actually the individual who gets to go up to the Sierra Peaks. These are remote sites that are obviously in the canyons. So these generators are run on a timer to as far as the maintenance goes, they run on a 30-minute timer. We track all of that in our log. Again, the gentleman next to me is the one who's responsible for that. He's the person that I called to find out how long our runtime was as soon as we found out that it was running, and he was allowed to go up there due to the fires. This is where the information that I was able to pull was that we were over by 40 hours simply because we were running for so long due to the fires and the lack of power or the poles that were even being ran to that site. We are willing to, for number 5 that you have listed here, we are willing to reduce excess emissions. You said this is Exhibit A here, and in referring to Exhibit A, we would have to limit ourselves to 15-minute run times rather than 30-minute run times, and we've already determined how we were going to do that. And I will be able to provide all the documentation that you guys have asked for on Exhibit A. That's it.
Thank you. Mr. Tomasovic, do you have questions for Mr. Shade?
To clarify one fact here, the engine, the backup generator at issue, starts automatically when there's a loss of power?
Can Fred?
Yes, there's an should I state my name right now? Fred.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can we wait if, Mr. Shade, if you don't know the answer to a particular question, can you just state you don't know, and then we will get to the second witness after we're done with questions for you?
I do not know.
Thank you. Would you agree that this generator is in service to something that could fairly be described as a firefighting facility or a police facility?
Yes.
Thank you. And to the extent it's used for wildfire fighting activities, would you agree that that wildfire suppression has benefits for air quality, that putting out a wildfire helps air quality in important ways?
Of course, definitely. And this site helps serve that purpose of getting those wildfires out and putting up excess particles into the air.
And can you speak a little to the chronology of the particular wildfire issues that first caused the engine to be turned on, but then also how it's been used, if there have been any other fires in recent weeks?
Are you asking, just to clarify, are you asking me how I came to find out that it was turned on?
I guess I'm asking for testimony on what fires and when were the fires, and have there been fires since that time that have also required either use of the engine or power's been restored and use of the same?
So on this specific incident, the fires, the Canyon Fire 1, I'm not exactly sure on the exact date. We were kind of discussing that prior to this so that I can present that date to you. I don't recall the exact date. However, it was within just a couple of days that I tried to reach out to AQMD to find out the path. I'm actually now this is a new position for me, so trying to find out that path that I would be taking in order to file for this, to petition for the short variance. So it was only a matter of a few days that I kind of made first initial contact in regards to the fact that this might be on. However, we didn't know if it was actually on until we were granted access, and that wasn't until the fire was put out. Again, I don't have a date for you on that.
No further questions.
Thank you. Board members, questions for Mr. Shade? Ms. Byrd?
Do you know in the past the use of the emergency ICE? Do you know what the past usage was like last year or any other time?
I do not.
Okay. Do you, you mentioned just a little bit, and I'd just like for you to elaborate on what has happened when circumstances require, well, let me put on my glasses, sorry. When communication was down, what happened the last time? You said something about loss of life. Can you just elaborate just a little bit?
Sure. This is quite a few years back, but there were approximately 12 firefighters that were battling a fire similar to our canyon fires. When you have such a large wildfire, firefighters battle those from different sides of the hill, whether that's from the south because the wind is pushing a certain direction, or from the north because it's pushing the other direction. Due to loss of communication, there was a shift of wind. And due to that shift of wind and the lack of communications, the firefighters were not told to get out of the way, and they lost something along the lines of about 15 firefighters. So again, this is probably 12 years ago, but it is something that has happened in law enforcement and fire. We don't forget about those things. So this is something that we need to prepare for, and again, just more of my opinion, the firefighters, everybody who was out there for the most recent fires have been putting these things out pretty fast, and we're thankful that the generators are working, and that they're able to communicate with each other. And you see the DC-10, the airplanes flying around. This is how they communicate, is through these towers.
Okay. And in addition to that, for the firefighters, this is also used for the sheriffs?
It is, yes. And any emergency communications can contact via these comm sites.
Any, okay. Just thought can you just tell me, when you say any, what else is there? There's the sheriffs, there's the
Any
fire?
local PD,
Local PD,
Riverside
okay.
County, Orange County, if somebody came into our zone to help us out, CDF, they can communicate via this. Anybody who's communicating within the 800 megahertz radio frequency that we're using, which is currently everybody, at least in California, they're able to use this comm site.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to hear about those firefighters. I hadn't. Thank you.
Mr. Shade, so I'm just going to go in no particular order. You are asking today for a variance from 203B, which requires compliance with your permit and permit condition number 4. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that is for the 200 hours
That's correct.
limitation. And is there any other rule that you're requesting variance from today?
I'm not.
Okay. Ms. Byrd asked you if you knew the number of hours that have been, that this generator has been used in past years. Do you know if you ever went over the 200 hours on this generator in past years?
I do not know that answer.
You do not know that answer. Would the other witness know the answer?
Yes, he would.
Okay, then we'll hold that. do you know the answer to this question? On page 7 of your, you mentioned that you have a cleaner propane engine. So on page 7, number 19 of your petition, is that the emissions profile? ROG 1.5 pounds per day, NOx 1.5 pounds per day, CO, how has that come to? Did you prepare that?
I did, along with my partner here. This is from the documentation that we have on our permit.
Okay, and so that is based on the emissions profile of the engine?
That's correct.
Okay. What did you mean by, you said something about 30-minute runtime being on? I didn't understand what you meant by that.
My partner here can go into more detail on that.
Okay. The only other thing to consider is that proposed condition number 3 on Exhibit A, that's the time by which you would be required to pay excess emission fees. That date of January 15th is outside of short variances can only be given for 90 days, and that includes from the date of any emergency or interim relief. And so that's outside of that time period, so we would have to have a different date. And it might be good well, let me ask you, do you know, and maybe the other witness would know, whether those calculations can be made before that date, perhaps by December 31st, or that payment be made, even if it's an estimated payment, which can later be adjusted?
I'm sure that we can.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, board members? Anyone else? Senator?
The brake horsepower on that engine, the district might want to be hearing this as well, is permitted. Brake horsepower is 225, 6-cylinder. And there's some conditions whether or not such equipment can be permitted. I just looked at a brake horsepower of 83, which is in excess of 50, and I don't think that was permissible under certain circumstances.
Yeah, it was a different engine, and it also was not, it was based on what was the horsepower and what are the emissions and what tier did it fall in, completely different, not apples to orange. It's apples to oranges. But you can ask the district if you want, when the district is
Is the
testifying.
district aware of?
Not now, but they will present a witness. Any questions for Mr. Shade? Anyone else? Okay, Mr. Shade, can you please introduce your other witness, and we can ask perhaps those other questions that have been left open.
Sure. To my left is Fred Massari. He's one of our electricians with the Orange County Sheriff's Department.
Can you spell can he spell his last name?
Yes, it's Massari.
Thank you, Mr. Massari. And did you take the oath today?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Mr. Shea, did you want to ask the questions of Mr. Massari, or would you like others to ask the questions?
You guys can ask the questions that you would like.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm an electrician with the Orange County Sheriff's Department.
Thank you. And Mr. Tomasovic, did you have questions? I know you had at least one that was left unanswered.
Yes, I have several. Is there an hours meter on the engine?
Yes, there is.
Do you know when it was checked prior to the first canyon fire?
Yes, we go up there. What he was referring to earlier when he mentioned the 30 minutes, our generators exercise themselves every week for 30 minutes, and they're monitored through a microwave system that reports to the Emergency Operations Center, Loma Ridge, out near Irvine Lake. And so they're monitoring every week. None of us are up there. You know, it's an unmanned radio communication site. Kind of the overview is we have over 20 of these spread out over all of Orange County, you know, on many mountaintops. The two, Sierra Peak and San Diego Peak, happen to be located within the Cleveland National Forest. And so literally we do I have a four-wheel drive truck and I have to off-road to get up to these sites. And the first canyon fire that broke out at the beginning of October, it started down at Cole Canyon near the 91 freeway, and it burned up towards our site. And what happens with these really remote sites, particularly up in the National Forest, we have Edison lines. They're 12,000 volt lines that are on poles, and they run for close to 10 miles from Cole Canyon up to Sierra Peak. And as that fire, it burned all the way up to Sierra Peak, and it burned all the way around our site and AT&T, Verizon, the other comm sites that are up there. But with our sites, it's police, fire, and medical that all get routed through there. So it's not just the sheriff's department, it is every city, municipality, California Highway Patrol, fire authority. And each one of those sites is built because if that site wasn't there and that tower wasn't there, there would be a dead zone. So if we do go dark and the generator fails after utility, in this case Southern California Edison has failed, then there's quite a large area where there's no communications. And the firefighters that he was referring to is in Laguna Beach. And when that happened, we ended up having to build 2 additional sites because we were a little behind the curve in some new building areas, and these firefighters were in remote areas. Most of our generators are diesel, but the Cleveland National Forest has requested the ones that are within their jurisdiction be propane. So these are turbocharged propane units. Those power poles that I was referring to coming from Cole Canyon, they run for miles, and when the fire burned up through there, quite a few poles went down and lines were damaged, and they couldn't even get in there. The total Edison outage lasted 10 days, and that's how we came with the 2. It was almost exactly the same hours, so it was 240 hours that we had registered during the 10 days of outage. But Edison couldn't even get in there for the first 5 or 6 days at all to even work on repairing the lines. And then once they started repairing the lines, it took them 3 or 4 more days to repair our lines and restore power.
And once the emergency generator is turned on automatically, how is the engine turned off? Is that manual?
No, it'll switch back as soon as Edison's available. Now, in our case, the Edison company had requested that I be present before we switch back because we have some other factors that we need to check. It's electrical terminology, but phase rotation and some things, because they had repaired so many lines, they wanted to make sure that the power they were restoring, 3-phase power, was being brought back correctly where it wouldn't damage any equipment. So I had to be present. But normally, in the normal course, when you guys asked about previous years, this is kind of a common occurrence. I've been an electrician for the Sheriff's Department for 20 years, and wildfires, are a problem in Southern California, particularly San Diego Peak, Bolero Peak, Sierra Peak. The ones that are back in these remote areas, we almost always get fires up in those areas almost every year. It's more rare that we'd have a year that doesn't affect our power situation.
And do you recognize a permit by the number D83832? I just want to confirm that that's a permit that applies to this engine.
Yes.
And this is a current valid permit.
Yes.
And the engine is not, just for clarification, the engine is not a portable engine. It's
No.
permanently at that site, connected to
It's on a
propane.
concrete pad. And
No further questions.
Thank you. Dr. Lerner, you have a question?
How much propane do you have that you can use continuously in the circumstance? You ran 240 hours, that's equivalent to 10 days worth. How much propane is usually stored and available for the engine to operate in these circumstances?
we have 2 very large propane tanks on site. And our general rule with our remote communication sites is our minimum that we try and shoot for is 2 weeks of runtime because of these conditions that happen from time to time.
Thank you.
Do you know, you mentioned that in past years that there have been wildfires and generators have been used. Do you know if this generator has gone over the 200 hours in past years?
Yes, it has.
Do you know how many times and what years?
No, I have those records back at our office, but it has happened a few times
A few times
in the
in,
20 years that I've been,
a few times in 20 years?
yeah.
Okay. Do you know if there's ever been consideration as to having a second generator on that site for times when 200 hours is exceeded? Only if you know.
Well, we haven't really been discussing that. Really, the only sites we have where we have redundancy is just for the sake of redundancy, not so much for the hours, but, you know, we have other sheriff facilities that we have redundancy just in case there's an engine failure, where we couldn't, you know, like our jail facilities, our substations, things like that. But at the communication sites, we don't currently have any that have dual generators.
And do you know if there's any other reason other than wildfires why these generators are, and maintenance and exercising the engine, why these engines are ever, why this engine is ever run?
Well, the other condition that will sometimes happen is winds, rain. You know, Santiago Peak, our other site, this site's at a little over 4,000 foot elevation, so it rarely gets snow. But our other site up there in Cleveland National Forest is at 6,000 feet, and it gets snow every year. So the lines sometimes get damaged during rain, snow, or wind, and then the lines go down, and then Edison has to come in and fix their lines before we can go back off our generator.
Can you explain what 30-minute runtime means and how that's relevant? I didn't understand that.
Well, we go up every 2 months to do on-site testing where we are present, we run the generator, we take all kinds of readings and record data. But every week, the generators exercise themselves. And so typically with the propane units, with the diesel units, you know, we're under a much tighter regulation of 20 hours per year of maintenance and testing. So at the diesel sites, they can only run for 15 minutes a week. But with the exception of these emergency conditions, with the propane units, it's 200 hours. So we have those programmed to run a half an hour, which pretty much all the manufacturers recommend a half an hour, but we've also got to comply with the AQMD rules. So even though it's not optimum for the units to run such short amounts of time, when we run 15 minutes, that means you can only run 10 minutes with actual load on the generator, and then you need to run another 5 minutes of cool down. But at the propane sites, we run 30 minutes a week.
Okay, so my question to you is, have you seen Exhibit A, which is the proposed conditions?
Yes.
Okay, and have you seen condition number 1, which would limit the exercising and maintenance time to 1 hour per month? And
Yeah, that'll be a little more challenging, but one of the things we had already discussed when we saw this today was we may just, until the end of the year, go up there every 2 weeks and run it manually ourselves for 30 minutes as opposed to letting it exercise for the 15. When the units come online and they run too short of a period of time with load, they barely start to warm up, and then they're shutting back down and cooling down, and that's not really good on the units.
Okay, and is that, in your opinion, sufficient to make sure that this unit continues to run well
Yeah,
and reliably?
yes.
Okay. What are the hours currently on this engine? Do you know?
No.
Do you know if it's, I don't
They're
recall
in
what
the
it was.
logs that are on site.
I'm sorry?
The current hours are in the log books that are on site.
I don't recall when it went over, how many, was it 240 at that time? When it was
Well,
checked?
240 is how much it had run over the 10-day course.
Right,
But
and I know that you or Mr. Shade had testified that there were other fires. Do you know?
well, the Canyon Fire 2 started about a week after they got the first fire out. It started at Gypsum Canyon, which is just down the road, less than 2 miles from the Coal Canyon location of the first fire.
Okay. Do you know if it's in excess of 250? Do you know if it's in excess of 300? Do you have any idea of
From
around
the
what it
second
is?
fire?
Yeah, any idea of what it might, what the runtime on it might be at this moment?
Are you speaking of the total runtime since the
For the
generator's
year.
put in service, or just for the year?
For the year?
Well, counting our normal exercise time, which is 26 hours, the 240 that got added, we're probably right at about 266 hours for the year.
So it didn't run again after the 240?
No, the second canyon fire affected some of our other facilities, particularly Loma Ridge, but not Sierra Peak.
Thank you, that clarifies it. Other questions, board members? Senator?
How long have you worked for this sheriff department?
20 years?
20 years. So you were not there in 1994.
No, 97 is when I started.
I see the permit was granted in 1994. And what tier unit is this?
I'm looking back at the original permit.
It doesn't say.
Yeah, I don't see the tier level listed. It is a turbocharged propane with a catalytic converter, which for its time back in 94 was about as clean as you could get for that time period.
Were you aware, if you know at all, that the California Air Resources Board had changed the standards since 1994? Are you aware?
Yes. Well, we have quite a few generators that are at that 20-plus year mark that there's been budget issues talked about
What
to
tier?
try and replace these.
What tier are you trying to replace them with?
Well, I'm just talking about overall our comm sites. That when I started, a lot of the generators went in actually 97 and 98. This particular one went in 94, but in 97, 98, they almost all got replaced with our new 800 megahertz radio system. But now that we're 20 years out from 19 to 20 years, for the majority of ours, we're in discussions budget-wise to try and replace them, but it's at 20 to 30 locations, so it's actually quite a large budgetary issue for us.
Is that it, Senator? Other questions? Any other questions? Thank you. Mr. Shade, is that all of your witnesses?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Mr. Tomasovic, do you have a witness?
I don't know that we actually need to call a witness, although if the board does have questions, we have available for the district, Stacy Cole. I did just want to drop a point that the tiers that CARB has relate to diesel internal combustion engines, and this engine is not a diesel engine, and therefore that whole question of tiers wouldn't apply for this engine at least. As he testified, there are other sites and locations that may use diesel engines where that might be an issue, but not for this petition.
And I want to remind the board that any of that discussion is irrelevant to this particular case. This particular petitioner for a variance is not, there's no question by the district that they're out of compliance except with the 200 hours that they are allotted in their permit for use of this generator. And that is the only issue for today. Board members, would anyone like to hear from the district witness? Have any questions? Okay. With that said, is there any member of the public who wishes to be heard? Seeing none. Mr. Shade, would you like to give a short closing statement?
Sure. In in closing, I just wanted to share kind of some of our discussion in regards to the remote sites and my partner here, Fred, having to drive up to those different comm sites. Like he had mentioned, the generator itself goes through a cycle on its own, not having anybody having to drive a vehicle up there twice a week, once a month, putting more pollutants into the air, driving through the national forest. In looking at kind of at Exhibit A, if there is any way that we can possibly, allow the machine to continue to do what it does on its own for a runtime of 30 minutes per week, to possibly allow for Fred to not have to drive a vehicle through the national forest, again, furthering, more pollutants into the air. If that's something that we can look into, that would be great. It's a 4-hour trip in total, in a fairly large vehicle, 4x4 vehicle that he is driving up in the forest. So if that's something that we can maybe look at, that would be great. If not, then obviously we can, as he stated, we can work with what has been drawn up on Exhibit A.
Thank you, Mr. Shade. Mr. Tomasovic, if you can give us your closing and then perhaps respond to the district's position on what Mr. Shade had just requested with regard to the 1 hour per month, and I assume making it 2.
Can we clarify that that is precisely the request, that the proposed conditions, you're asking that we consider changing 1.0 to 2.0? Is that what you're suggesting would satisfy you?
Yes, please.
I would like to go off the record to discuss with district personnel.
That is a fair request. We're off the record. We're back on the record. Mr. Tomasovic.
The district believes that the evidence that's presented today does support each of the findings to grant a short variance, and therefore we don't oppose granting a short variance subject to the conditions submitted, with the modification noted by the chair to change the date in condition number 3 from January 15th, 2018 to 12/31/2017. We also discussed the proposed change to paragraph 1, shall operate the internal combustion engine no more than 1.0 hours. It'll be fine with the district if that is adjusted upward slightly to 2.0 hours per month total.
Thank you. Board members, discussion? Ms. Byrd?
I'll start if you like. I believe that we can make all the findings. For number one, the facility is already in in violation. They've exceeded their 200 hours due to a fire that occurred where Southern California Edison's lines were down and the generator kicked in. Number two, that it's beyond their reasonable control because it was a fire, and this is a backup generator located in this area for this very purpose to kick on when there is an emergency. This is also, we can also consider this petitioner to be part of essential public service, even though I don't think we usually, well, we give some preference to essential public services, but I think we could make all the findings even if we didn't say that. So this would be an arbitrary or unreasonable taking of property. This facility or this county agency needs this generator, and as was explained, it needs it for a number of reasons. The police department, the fire departments, medical, CHP, California Fire Authority, all various agencies that deal with emergencies are depending on the ability of this generator to kick on so that they can communicate, and this is critical. It was mentioned that in the past, some years ago, that there were actually firefighters lost because of a lack of communication. So I believe that this is beyond their reasonable control, and it's definitely necessary. Closing, and that goes into number 3, that closing or taking would be without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. The life balanced over the small amount of emissions in a remote location, definitely that this closing or taking would be without a corresponding benefit to reducing air contaminants. And just the fact that fires themselves, if the use of this equipment is because of a fire, however, whatever it takes to knock that fire down faster would reduce air contaminants. So I think that we can easily make the finding in number 3. Petitioner has given consideration to curtailing operations. Petitioner initially stated that they would reduce the number of hours that they were exercising the equipment as a way of curtailing operation, but I don't, from the testimony, I don't believe that that would really be reasonable, and I don't think that that would be safe. In the past, they have exercised this equipment for 30 minutes a week, and they are now requesting to continue to do that. So I don't think that that would, I think that curtailment might not be an option for this generator. During the period that variance is in effect, the applicant will reduce excess emissions. Once again, I don't think that, well, to the extent feasible is what they're doing. It may not be feasible. They have to run this equipment. It has to operate when they need it to operate, so we don't want to take any chances with that. And during the period the variance is in effect, the applicant will monitor the conditions in Exhibit A, specifically number 3, well, 2 and 3, have to do with documenting times, dates, maintenance, the reasons for operation, non-emergency operation, as well as the excess emissions. So that's taken care of in Exhibit A and the conditions. And if requested to do so, they will provide these to the district. And for those reasons, I think we can make the findings.
Thank you, I agree. Anyone else wish to join the discussion? Senator?
The findings I'm not addressing at this point. Maybe what I'm saying in some way will relate to it. I just look at the ex parte, and it says that the NOx to be determined, carbon dioxide to be determined, and I don't think we discussed that at all.
We did. I did ask the question on page 7 of the petition, number 19. There's an estimation of pounds per day for ROG, NOx, and CO. The reason why it's depicted as to be determined is because it's unclear at this point how many hours
What page
this,
is that on?
page 7 of the petition,
Okay.
is because it's unclear at this point how many hours this generator may or may not run on an emergency basis.
That being the case, I was just wondering, since they, in certain circumstances, there may or may not be excessive emission. Why the permit doesn't show that this equipment deserves a tier rating? And when the permit is issued, there's no tier rating. I'd be interested to know that.
Senator, first of all, we are in deliberation, so
I
we're not
understand.
asking. But I have to just remind us that right now we're hearing a different sort of case. Right now we are hearing a variance request from a petitioner. We're not hearing an order for abatement where the district is alleging that anyone is out of compliance using a particular engine in any manner whatsoever. Rather, the petitioner noticed on its own accord that it had exceeded the 200 hours and thus petitioned this board for a limited short variance to get it through the rest of the year to have more hours on its already permitted and allowable engine. And so the only issue we have to determine is whether the 6 findings have been satisfied, that it was beyond their reasonable control to go over the 200 hours, et cetera, in order to allow for that short variance. Whether the tiers, any of that is not at issue in this particular case.
I know what the issue is, but they attached a permit to construct and to operate. And I was just saying that was not part of the permit. And I'm just wondering why, since we've consistently done that.
The permit is attached for one reason, I can tell you without even looking at it, to tell you what the condition is that they're violating, and the condition that they're violating is the 200 hours. So in order for us to know if that was a violation, they've attached a copy of the permit that indicates that that's how many hours they have to operate.
Plus, even though it is irrelevant to the matter at hand, Mr. Tomasovic did explain to the board that the tiers are for diesel engines and this is a propane engine.
I was just asking for consistency from the district, that's all, in the future.
Okay, seeing no inconsistency. Is there anyone else who would like to add to the discussion? The only other thing I'd like to add to Mr. Shade, we haven't voted yet or made the motion, but I'm going to wait. I'm going to have my comments after we actually make a motion, because that would be relevant to if the motion passes. Would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll
Ms.
make the
Byrd.
motion. In the matter of Orange County Sheriff's Department, case number 6091-1, for the facility located at 7625 Black Star Canyon Road in Corona, California, 92882. I move that we issue this short variance I don't think I need to go back through all of what I just said since I just did it. Making the findings for the equipment that is on page 4 of the petition. Excuse me, no. For the condition that's on page 4 of the petition, that's exceeding that 200-hour runtime for the year, and it's for the generator. Oh, okay, that's the problem, it's not on here. It would be in number 6, but it's not listed there, but it's for the generator.
I think it's sufficient since there is only one ICE at the facility address. I believe it's 7625 Black Star Canyon Road. Is that where the ICE is located?
That's correct.
I think that would be
Well,
sufficient.
The permit, I'll just mention that it's with the equipment on the permit, number D as in dog 83832. And it is, the expected emissions are ROG 1.5 pounds per day, NOx 1.5 pounds per day, CO 2 pounds per day. And it's with the conditions in Exhibit A with the following changes. In number 1, instead of on line 2 where it says 1 hour, it would be 2 hours per month for exercising and maintenance. And then in number 3, on the third line of number 3, we would change January 15th, 2018 to December 31st, 2017. And I believe that's all the changes.
That complete your motion?
That completes my motion.
I'm going to second the motion. And I'm going to just clarify that the variance would be from, did you say it starts
It
today?
starts immediately, and it will end when, at the reset, which will be December 31st, 2017.
Thank you. And it is, I know you mentioned for the 200 hours in their permit limit, but just to be clear, it's from Rule 203B, which requires compliance with the permit, and it's condition 4 with respect to the 200-hour limit. And just to
Correct.
clarify, the excess emissions, as you stated them, but they are to be determined based upon
Right,
the usage. Is that
exactly.
correct?
Yes. Commencing immediately and ending December 31st, 2017.
Mr. Camarena?
Regarding condition number 3, requires petitioner to calculate, record, and report all excess emissions during the variance period. The variance period ends on December 31st, and to pay appropriate excess emission fees by December 31st. Some of those excess emissions will occur on December 31st.
They may.
It seems to me unreasonable to require the payment of the fees on the same day that they occur. I
Well-
think that date should be different.
We have two options. First, to leave it as is, and to recall that oftentimes we require the payment of excess emissions fees within 15 days of the hearing, which is well in advance of the end of the variance period. They have the opportunity to be adjusted once the period is over. The other option is I calculated, I believe, 90 days from when the original emergency variance was granted would be January 3rd. That could be a date also that we could fit in. And so the variance would be granted from condition number 4 until December 31st, 2017, but the variance would continue through January 3rd for that particular item. Is that, and let me ask the motion maker, is that, would you prefer?
That's acceptable.
Okay. And let me ask,
I think that time of year is going to be difficult, period, to get anything
Right.
done, but we'll put that in.
is that acceptable, Mr. Shade?
Yes, it is.
And is that acceptable to the district?
Yes.
Okay, and it's acceptable to the second, so we have a new motion that will change condition number 3, instead of to December 31st, 2017, to January 3rd, 2018, and we'll change the period of the variance as was just stated. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Mr. Camarena, how do you vote?
Yes.
Dr. Lerner, how do you vote?
Yes.
Senator, how do you vote?
Aye.
I vote yes. How do you vote, Ms. Byrd?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, the one thing I wanted to say was, in other cases that we have heard where there is a consistent generator, a generator in a remote place where it consistently goes over 200 hours, is to perhaps speak with the district about the potential for a second generator to cover that. So again, if a petitioner consistently comes before the board, it becomes less clear that it's beyond reasonable control. So just a heads up to maybe look into that possibility.
Thank you.
Any other, before we take our lunch break? Okay, we're going to take our lunch break. We are done with the cases for today. We will reconvene at 12:30 in CC8. And at that time, we're going to take up the regular board meeting for this month, and then we're going to have our special session, which is a training for board members and alternates. So we'll reconvene on the record at 12:30 in CC8. We're off the record. Thank you.